Amen, and welcome back into this study we're calling Living on Empty, as we're going through the Bible's book of Ecclesiastes and learning about those unrealistic expectations that will drain you and gaining some redemptive perspective that will help you to enjoy life now. Let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 8, and let's talk about the idea that good guys don't always win. Life works pretty good in TV and movies. You have this underdog story. Somebody stands up in a time of injustice, and man, in the end, they win the title, they KO the evil, and they win the state championship. We're talking about movies like Rocky or Karate Kid, or movies that are loosely based on real stories, maybe like Remember the Titans. Because it always seems like in movies like that, it always works out and the good guy always wins. But that's not the way life goes. Sometimes you take a stand and you get KO'd. Sometimes you're the guy who took a stand at work, saw something that was wrong, tried to make it right, and you got fired. And that's the real world that you and I live in. You tried to be heroic, and things turned out disappointing. And when that happens, here comes those unrealistic expectations. This is the way it ought to go. This is the way I envisioned it would go. That brings about a cloud of disappointment. Man, what's God doing to me? I'm ridiculous. I'm stupid. I'm unlucky. I'm a loser. That cloud of bad theology and just crushing your own spirit and your own self-worth in those moments, man, that can make a guy go into that just really dark place in his mind and in his soul when life doesn't go the way he wanted it to go. The good guy doesn't always win. And that can be a real punch in the face. So let's learn three perspectives that will help you deal with that disappointment. And I know there's been past lessons where we've talked about perspectives that will help you deal with disappointment, not let it drain you. But that's really kind of a lot of what each chapter in Ecclesiastes is about. Ecclesiastes chapter 8 is not easy to just read and understand at first reading. So I'm going to kind of walk through it slowly, help you to understand it along the way. But let's talk about the first idea, perspective number one, that'll help you deal with that disappointment, and that is that doing the right thing may not turn out the right way. I wrote a book about David, and I said in that book that sometimes you can be perfectly in the will of God and be squarely in the line of fire. And sometimes when you do the right thing, boy, there's a lot of things that can go wrong in the world that we live in. And so this is kind of the crux of the passage. So let's start in Ecclesiastes 8, verse 1. He says, "Who is like the wise, and who knows the interpretation of a thing?" It's a good way of saying we're still trying to figure this out. "A man's wisdom makes his face shine, and the hardness of his face is changed. I say," here we go, "keep the king's command because of God's oath to him." So verse 2, we have somebody who has all the power, the king. He's in charge. Verse 3, "Be not hasty to go from his presence. Do not take your stand in an evil cause, for he does whatever he pleases." In other words, he's saying you better really think about how you react when you're in this guy's presence, because you may see that there is a change that needs to be made, but you're not in charge. So I want you to think about how many times in life, there's a lot of things in life, you want to make a change, you know what's right, but you're not in charge. So what he's saying right here is when you don't have the power, you need to take a pause and really think through this, what you do. And we're going to talk about the options here in just a few moments. He says, "For the word of the king is supreme, and who may say to him, 'What are you doing?'" He said, be real careful when you walk in there and tell him what he ought to be doing. "Whoever keeps the command will know no evil thing, and the wise in heart will know the proper time and the just way." And sometimes it's doing the right thing at the right time. Verse 6, "For there's a time and a way for everything, although a man's trouble lies heavy on him." Just because you feel it and want it, and man, you know it's wrong, it's heavy inside of you, it may not be the right time to do something about it. It's kind of what he's saying in that verse. Verse 7, "For he who does not know what is to be, for who can tell him how it will be? No man has the power to retain the spirit or the power of the way of death. There is no discharge from war. nor will wickedness deliver those who are given to it. All this I observed while applying my heart to know all that's done under the sun when man had power over man to his hurt. In other words, he's saying this. You may decide, hey, this has got to be done. But you may also find out you don't really have the power to determine how it's going to go. And it may have consequences, war, for a long time. It may bring about a lot of hurt for a long time. So basically what he's saying is this, is, man, you may do the right thing, but it may not go the right way. And when that happens, you just got to leave it to God. I read a lot of different commentaries, but man, one of the most pastoral, simple ones that you can read, one that I've always it's one of those golden classics. It's always proven over time. It's kind of a go-to. Warren Wiersbe was a pastor, and he wrote a long series of books on every book of the Bible, and they call them the B books because you got every title of these books begins with be something, whether it's be worshipful or be wise or whatever, and it's a commentary on different books in the Bible. And he says about this passage right here that when you're in a situation, you want to make a change, and you're not in charge, that basically you have four options. One is disobedience. I'm not going to do it. I am not going to obey what I'm being told to do. Desertion, which means I'm going to walk away. I quit. I'm out. Defiance. I'm going to disrupt. I'm going to cause a scene. You're going to know that this isn't right and that I'm mad. And then discernment, which is that idea of, hey, doing the right thing is also really important that you do it at the right time, which is very much what this talks about. Now, in those four things, the Bible really tells you that kind of there's a place for all four of them at certain times. The Bible tells you there's a place for disobedience. There's a time when you say, I'm not going to obey man, I'm going to obey God. There's a time when you may just say, you know what? I'm out. There's no reason to keep doing this. I cannot make a change from within. I'm going to make a change from without. A great historical example of that would be Martin Luther, who was in the Catholic Church and said, you know what? Can't fix it. So let's go and we got to do something else because something's got to change. Withdrawal. Defiance. I'm going to disrupt, right? So this is the one the Bible probably cautions you the most against. An example of this would be when Jesus goes into the temple courtyard and he turns over all the tables. That's obviously a very bunch of disruption. And my wisdom would be on that of, hey, you know what? He is all-knowing. He is all-wise. He is righteous in all his ways. Let's just leave that one to Jesus. So because usually you and I, when we try that one, it doesn't go well. And then ultimately what the Bible calls us to is discernment. And that is doing the right thing, but also doing it at the right time. And that's really where you got to, even though he's saying in verse 6, you got it in your heart, something's got to give. Man, timing is everything. But in the end, he also is warning us that we don't control the outcomes. So here's what I think Solomon's ultimately saying, is that you and I are responsible for obedience. We got to do what God tells us to do. But at the end of the day, the sovereignty of God is in control of the outcomes. It may not go the way you want it to go. It may not go the way you thought it should go. But either way, man, you got to leave it to God. And that'll help you with the disappointment. Hey, listen, here's the thing. In the end, God calls you to be faithful, not successful. And in this life, by all accounts, what we're learning in Ecclesiastes is you may not be very successful in being faithful. You may be faithful and it does not lead to promotion. You may be faithful and it doesn't turn out the way you thought it ought to go. Man, you just obey, you keep your eyes on God, not on the world, and you realize, man, in the end, he's in control and he's going to take care of me. So realize, number one, even though you do the right thing doesn't mean it's going to go the right way. So perspective number two is this: life isn't fair. So I'm going to fear God anyway. So let's get into verse 10 here. He says, then I saw the wicked buried. They used to go in and out of the holy place and were praised in the city where they had done such things. This also is vanity. In other words, he says, you got a guy who's getting buried and everybody's up there talking about how great he is. And hey, listen, this is a funeral in the South, right? Because I say this all the time. Where I live is in Georgia. I pastored a church in Alabama, and I used to say it when I lived there, just like I say it when I say it here. Man, everybody in Georgia goes to heaven. Everybody does. You know that's not true. But that's the way we talk. And that's the way we act. Because I've never been to a funeral where anybody stood up there and goes, man, now that guy right there, you know where he is right now. No, nobody ever does that, right? Because probably not the time or place. Getting back to time and place. But, you know, it is kind of the idea of everybody's up there kind of saying great things about him at the funeral, and there's people sitting there going, man, that guy was wicked. And when I brought this message to our men at our church, there's actually a guy who walked up to me after that, and he said, man, I was at a funeral just like that the other day. This guy went to church. You saw him in the temple, walking in and out, and everybody praised his name. He said, but, man, I know that guy died. He said, and I'm sitting there at the funeral, and everybody's talking about how great he is, and he said, man, I know what he's really like. That's sad. But you know what? That's the way life goes. That's just the world we live in. All right, so now let's go to verse 11. He says, because the sentence against evil, an evil deed, is not executed speedily. In other words, he says, there's something at work in the world where justice doesn't happen as fast as we would like for it to. Everything doesn't turn out right and fair as quickly as it ought to. He says, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil. People are they're mean, they're cruel, they're evil. He says, though a sinner does evil 100 times and prolongs his life, yet I know that it will be well with those who fear God because they fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked. Neither will he prolong his life like a shadow because he does not fear before God. So let's just kind of break that down for a moment. Life isn't fair, but God is still God. And this is just the way things work in this world. So we have to understand that. Now, let's say two truths right here. One is this: grace is costly. Now we say, yeah, grace is costly because it cost Jesus Christ his life, the birth, death, the burial, the resurrection of Jesus Christ, the gospel story, man. Grace is not free. He paid an incredible price for grace. But what I mean by grace is costly is this: grace is also costly in the sense of there's a lot of evil in the world that needs to be judged, but it's not being judged yet. And grace is costly in the sense of sometimes you'll be the victim of evil in the day of grace. Now, we also know this, man, the grace of God is meant to cause you to repent of sin. But we also know the grace of God can also give people opportunity for them to harden in their sin because they think, hey, I'm getting away with it. I don't feel judgment. I'm making pretty good money. My life's going really well, and I'm doing what I want. So they don't fear God. They're just prideful. They become more and more prideful in their sins. You know what? Grace gives them time and room to do that. The reason it's costly, why I say it's costly is because sometimes in the midst of that, you and I are going to pay a price because grace is going to cause some things to happen in our life that are just absolutely not pleasant. Second, you need to understand this: delayed judgment is not denied judgment. Delayed judgment is not denied judgment. Just because God is not judging it now doesn't mean he's not going to judge it. So ultimately what he's saying is the perspective you need to have in this so that you're not drained by the disappointment is this: you need to do what he says. Fear God. Play the long game. You need to know how it's going to end up. You know what? Hey, listen, people that don't know the Lord, this is all the heaven they're ever going to have. This is as good as it's ever going to get. Because, man, in eternity, it's going to be eternally bad. When they perish, when they go into the lake of fire, man, that's going to be an awful torment of judgment. So now is the day of grace when God is calling them to turn and repent of sin and believe in him as their Savior. So understand this: delayed justice and judgment is not denied justice and judgment. So fear God. Play the long game. Perspective number 3. There is no secret to success. Receive joy as God's gift. Let's start reading in verse 14. He says, there's a vanity that takes place on the earth, that there are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. In other words, he says, sometimes you do the right thing and it goes the wrong way. You're a righteous man who gets treated like a wicked man should. A wicked man gets treated, if life is fair, is in a world that's unfair, like a righteous man should. He said, man, it's all turned around in this world right now. He said, I said this is also vanity. Man, you can get real discouraged by that. That it can drain you. And he said, I commend joy. Look at this, verse 15. I commend joy. For man has nothing better under the sun but to eat and drink and be joyful, for this will go with him in his toil through the days of his life that God has given him under the sun. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, how neither day or night nor one's eyes see sleep, then I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that's done under the sun. However much he may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. So in other words, he's saying this, hey, listen, there's no secret to success. There's no silver bullet. There's no, you know what, when you do right and it goes wrong, it's not because you missed a step. It's just sometimes the way it works out. And the question we want to ask is why? Why, God? And you know what? You can be like Job. And this is kind of, we talked about it previously where Job asked a lot of questions. And I'm gonna say it again. How many of Job's questions did God answer? None. And here's the truth, guys. God may not answer all your questions. He may not address all your frustrations. But I tell you what God does when we seek him and we fear him. He reveals himself. And that's what God did for Job. He revealed himself to Job. And ultimately, that's what we need. And so there's just some mysteries in life that can't be solved. There's no silver bullet. There's no secret of success. And so it may not be that you did it wrong. It just may mean that in the world we live in, it just went wrong, even though you did it right. But I love what he says in verse 15, and it's the idea of, I commend joy. The word commend is really close, not only in spelling, but also in meaning to the word command. And that tells you something about joy. Joy is not an emotion. Joy is a command. So as such, joy is not just something to be felt, but it's something to be chosen. It is something that we are to obey. Man, the Bible tells us to, what? Be joyful in all things. And again, just in case you didn't hear it the first time, again, I say rejoice, right? So, man, sometimes when we do the right thing and it goes the wrong way, God doesn't answer all of our questions and he doesn't address all of our frustrations. He does commend joy. He commands joy. And he tells us you have a choice to make right here. And you know what? It may not be going the way that you want it to go, but I can still be obedient to God and I can be joyful in all the circumstances that I'm in, knowing that in the end, all that's wrong is going to be made right. But right now, the good guy doesn't always win. And having that perspective, even though life can be disappointing, you don't have to let that disappointment drain you, because you have a redemptive perspective knowing that ultimately what is going on, and you can choose out of obedience, I'm going to take joy because God knows where I am, what I'm doing, and he's going to take care of me. A lot of good things to talk about in this session, guys, so I hope you dive into the questions, you meet together, let some iron sharpen iron. I'll see you in the next session.